Hello everyone, Watson Shrivastava, aka MR.logzoid, and in today's video I'm going to help you guys improve your modeling skills in Blender. So without further ado, let's get into it. So before I start, I'm going to enable my screencast keys as that will help let you guys concentrate. Now that I have my screencast keys enabled, let's delete the default scene. So let's hit A, X, delete. Now let's add a reference image so we can start modeling on the reference image. So let's hit add, image, reference. And let's locate the little reference image that I got downloaded from online. It's a shutter image, let me just tell you. And I'll link it in my Patreon page, so if you guys gonna want to check it out, go to my Patreon page. I'll link it in the description down below. So let's click on the little reference image and hit don't align to view and load reference image. And now you can see the reference image is flatted out. Now we want to rotate this reference image 90 degrees on the x-axis. You could rotate this reference image manually by just hitting R, X, and rotate it, but instead of doing that, I want to rotate it 90 degrees automatically and let Blender do the work for me. So to do that, all you have to do is select the little reference image and hit R, X, 90. And now you can see all we have to do is just type digits and Blender did the work for us. And now let's hit G, Z, 1 to center this little reference image to our 3D cruiser. Now let's hit 1 on my number pad key and just basically sort of position my my view to the little vase. Now that we have basically set it up the scene, let's also close our timeline so we can see everything properly. Now let's add a little cylinder so we can start modeling this, because the closest shape that resembles this cylinder is the vase is a cylinder. The closest shape that resembles this vase is a cylinder, so let's add a cylinder. So let's hit add mesh cylinder, and you can see that we have a pretty good looking cylinder. Now let's hit GZ and start positioning this thing on the middle. And now let's go into edit mode and go to vertice selection and enable X-ray mode. Toggle X-ray mode on, and let's select the top of the vertex. If you don't have X-ray mode enabled and select the little vertices on the front, you can see that we do not select the back vertices. But if you do have X-ray mode enabled and you select everything here, you can see that we have selected everything. So that's really good, and it's really convenient to enable X-ray mode. You could also do this in wireframe mode, but I recommend using X-ray mode instead, as it's a good habit to make things easier in Blender. So first of all, let's start matching in the height and the length of the vase with the cylinder. So let's hit G, Z, and make this taller, about there. And let's do the same thing for the bottom. G, Z, and move this down. And before I go any further, I have to clear a little term, and it really confuses a lot of artists, and it's really confusing to me as well. But a single vertex, a single thing, a single dot is called a vertex, and a lot of these are called vertices. So I just wanted to clear that term. It's a quick term, but it's a thing that's been confusing me for a lot of time, so I thought I might clear that doubt. So let's get back into it. Let's go ahead and select the bottom vertices and start positioning them. So about there. And let's go ahead and hit Control R to add a loop cut so we can start making this smaller. Now, if you don't know what a loop cut is basically a thing that adds extra vertices to your mesh. So let's hit Control R and start positioning the vertices, and let's make it about here. Now let's hit S and make this smaller. So let's make it about there. And let's make this top vertices also smaller. So let's hit S and make this smaller. And now that we have a pretty good looking shape here, a journal shape, let's hit Control R again and position it again into a place that we need it to be. So right about here. And let's hit S and start scaling it again, say about here. Let's hit Control R once more here, and let's hit S. And now we're basically done over here. So we're basically done with the top area. You could give it some fine tuning by adding in another loop cut here and start scaling it, but I think it's not necessary. So let's hit Control R again, start positioning the vertices, and say about here. And let's hit S again and scale it to about here. Again, Control R again, right about here. Scale this again. Make sure you get away with as less as vertices as possible, because it always gives you much better topology if you have lesser vertices. So make sure you go away with less vertices. So let's just make this better again. Let's add one last loop cut about here, and let's make this one a little bit broader. So let's say here, make this one shorter. And now you can see that we have modeled a pretty journal VOS shape. So let's disable toggle off the X-ray mode. And you can see that we have a pretty journal VOS shape. It's a good practice to keep modeling this and just basically make it as good as possible. Obviously, you can end up with a better result than me also, but I recommend just keep doing it again and again. You could always get a better result. So now let's start off by deleting the top face. So again, go into edit mode, face selection, and delete the top face by hitting X face. And then go into object mode again, and you can see that we have a pretty good looking WAS. Now let's make this high topology by going to the modifiers tab, add a modifier, subdivision surface. And you can see that we have a really good looking WAS now. Let's also make this thing tighter on the bottom by going into edit mode, Control R, loop cut, and make this thing tighter. Let's do it one more time, Control R, and make this thing tighter. Now let's turn the maximum subdivisions to 3, as that will give us a nice topology. And let's turn the quality of this thing to 5, as that will look really nice. And now you can apply the subdivision surface. And now let's add a really good detail by going to add modifier and add a solidify. But before adding the solidify, let's also shade smooth so we have a pretty high poly gloss. Now let's add a modifier, add a solidify modifier, and let's make this thing thicker. So let's go for about 4. And now you can see we have a pretty thick looking gloss. Now that we have a pretty good looking gloss, let's go ahead and give this a material. For the material, I'm just going to open up a shader editor on my corner window. Let's give this, select the material, select the gloss, and let's quickly give this a name. So in my case, I'm going to name this gloss. And let's give this a new material and name this material gloss as well. Gloss as well. What am I doing? Gloss. Anyways, let's name this material gloss, and let's go for a very cheesy material. So by cheesy, I mean just adding an image texture, putting this image texture on the base color, opening that same image that you used, for that inside of this. So basically, I'm just asking you to load that same image that you used for the modeling. So let's just load that image. And if I go into metal preview, which is LogDev, you can see it looks really cheesy. But to fix it, just open up a UV editor, and let's select that same reference image. Let's go into edit mode, and let's select all. And you can see that we have a pretty bad UV projection. So to fix it, let's hit number pad 1, and let's hit U, project from view. And we have a gloss. Now let's make it better. Let's hit S to scale and start scaling this gloss nice and big. And you could think about how you want it. So in my case, let's go back in, make it smaller maybe. No, make it bigger maybe. Let's make it better by scaling it out. Maybe like that. And now you can see we have a pretty good looking material. It's a little bit cheesy, but does the trick really good. So you can keep fiddling around with it till what you like the best. So in my case, I like this. So let's head back into the shader editor. Take the color socket of your image texture and put it into the roughness. And also take another supplement and you can put it into the metallics. But I'm going to put it basically on my subsurface color. So now that we have a pretty good looking gloss, let's go ahead and go into rendered view mode. Let's load a little HDRI, 360 HDRI. Let's go into environment texture. Let's open up a basic environment texture. So in my case, I'm going to open up urban street. You could use any other HDRI. I'm not going to link this one in the description down below because I'm unable to find it. You can find any other HDRI. It's depending on you. But in my case, I'm going to use urban street. So let's open this. And there you can see that we have this thing. Now let's quickly render this in cycles as it looks better in cycles. And there you go. Now you can see that we have a pretty general VOS. You could render it both in Eevee and cycles, but in my opinion, it looks more real in Eevee. Let's add a camera as well to our scene so we can kind of get a journal little thing. So in my case, I'm going to position the camera about here. I'm going to rotate this on the Z-axis about 90 degrees. So find a good journal location of this. This is nice. And you can see we have a really, really good looking journal VOS. I kind of really like it, you know. It looks really good. So now we have a really good journal looking VOS, as you can see. The material is not that great, but you could go with any other material you want to. It's depending on what you like. Personal preference, basically. That's the great thing about 3D. But in my case, I really like it. Now let's compare this to our reference image. By the way, always save your work. So let's hit save, save as, and let's save this as final VOS. Alright, let's save this as final VOS, save as, and now that we've saved this, let's position the reference image and compare them. Like, I did miss a few details. I do admit it that I did miss a few details, but it looks almost resembling to the VOS. I was a little short on time, but still I was able to manage a pretty good looking VOS. You guys have lots of time at your home because of the lockdown, so you could really make this as good as possible. And make sure you guys can send it to me on my Patreon. You guys can share this to me on my Patreon. Simply, you guys could just go onto my Patreon, become a member of my channel, and share stuff. You know, that's the thing about my Patreon. I'm developing a lots of things on my Patreon. So if you guys want to go ahead and check out my Patreon, that'd be greatly appreciated. And subscribe if brand new, that'd be also greatly appreciated. And yeah, leave a like on this video. I hope this helped you guys a lot. And yeah, guys, I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.